One. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. And Helen, welcome. It's brilliant to have you here. So why don't you introduce yourself to people and tell them about the great work that you do?
Thank you, Alan. This is really exciting to be here and to do this with you. So my name is Helen Sanderson. I lead a training consultancy organisation called HSA, and I'm lucky enough to work with 4 fantastic colleagues. And I kind of do work in health and social care. So it might be helping teams work with greater trust and autonomy. I have a particular really nerdy thing about policies and procedures. How do we think about the sort of boundaries and structures that we have that support people to work well and link it to learning? So I don't think there's a neat way of describing what I do, except I follow my heart and my energy, and I have fun and work with some great people. I think that's it, really.
Brilliant. Just a couple of things on that. You said you follow your heart, and you might also say follow your values.
Of course.
I was giving a graduation speech to a group of sophrologists about 2 years ago. And I was coming to this topic of following your whatever. And as I was speaking, for some reason, I just remembered that my gran used to say, you need to follow your nose.
Yes.
And it's the equivalent. And so I use that now. And I'd love to ask her whether it meant, you follow your heart and follow your values, or whether it was something different. And then the other thing, you mentioned health and social care. There's a link here with ValuesJam, because what we've discovered over what, a year and a bit now, nearly 2 years, is that what happens repeatedly during a ValuesJam, I don't know if it'll happen with us, but it does happen a lot, is that people say, oh my goodness, this has just crossed my mind. And I haven't thought of that for more than a decade. So I was curious about this, ended up speaking to a psychologist in New Zealand. And he said that because values conversations are deep, what might be happening is that previously lapsed neural pathways are being resparked. And that's what's causing the memory to resurface. So as a result of that, we're now speaking to people that operate in the area of dementia and Alzheimer's. Because imagine in a senior living setting, for instance, instead of these, trite games of bingo, imagine a resident being able to have a conversation with dignity with either a fellow resident or a caregiver or a visitor. And imagine, for instance, going to see your elderly mum and hearing from her about forgiveness and a time earlier in her life when she experienced it. I just think it would be a wonderful experience for all parties.
I completely agree. I started off my working career as an occupational therapist, and we used to work with older people around what was then called reminiscence therapy. But what you've described is a layer deeper than just talking about what happened to you, but talking about it as an expression of who you are and your values. Feels completely different.
Okay, maybe we'll have a conversation offline about that.
Okay.
So I've got the ValuesJam card deck here, so I'm going to just tip them out. And then how many piles would you like me to put in front of me, Helen?
3, please.
3. I should start counting the numbers that people say, because it does tend to be 3. And would you like the left, middle, or right?
The middle, please.
Okay. So bear with me. I've got 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16, 18, 21 cards. So a number between 1 and 21.
5. This feels like a great game show, doesn't it?
Yeah. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, this will be interesting. So this is the card that we've chosen, security.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Why wow?
Because it immediately triggers some thoughts for me.
Okay. So first question, what does security mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
So the most recent conversation I had about security was a few days ago, and I live in a small village in Wales. And I don't lock my door during the day, and I lock it during the night. And a guest said, that's not very secure, is it? So I think my first reflections on security is often about how you keep your place and your property safe, and what does that look like, and not needing to do that in this community except at night feels wonderful to me, feels great, and also feels quite unusual. So I think that's my first reflection. And then the other conversations that people have about security is about financial security. So like, I'm 58, so people are starting to say things to me like, are you going to retire? And then do you have enough in your pension pot to retire? And those kinds of questions. But I remember reading a book about money. I'm doing I have 6 books about money on my desk downstairs, not about how to make money, but the connection between money and happiness. And one of the assumptions about money is the more money you have, the greater sense of security you'll have in your own old age. And this particular book really challenges that, and says actually it's about your sense of purpose, your connection to other people, and your physical health that will enable you to live well in your old age, not what's in your pension pot. And therefore it challenges me and other people to think about how are you investing your money, time and resources in your connections and your sense of purpose, and in your body now, as opposed to worrying about what you've got in your pension pot. So they feel like pretty superficial, ordinary things. Is your property secure? Are you financially secure? But I've also been doing a lot of reading about attachment theory recently, and the idea about people being securely attached, and the difference between people who are securely attached and people who are either anxious or avoidant. So those are the things that spring to mind from my reading and my research, and from conversations with people over the last month or two.
And the books about money, I seem to remember reading something about up to a certain level of either income or money. What you said is true about the relationship between money and happiness or security, or a combination of both. But beyond that level, it's not related at all.
No, it's £50,000 is the current estimate of that. So not to underestimate what it's like to be worried about money. And we know that the levels of debt that lots of people have, and that lots of relationships struggle around conversations about money. So I know how significant it is, but also that just to know that above that doesn't bring you more happiness, and therefore the current culture of striving to get more and more money, or being higher up on the traditional hierarchy at work, doesn't make any sense in relation to happiness, unless it's deeply connected to your purpose. So I think the connection between work and money is really interesting. But for me, it's much more about an expression of my purpose and my values and contribution. And if I can stay anywhere near the 50K a mark, that's good for me too.
Yeah. And you've reminded me of a story from, see if I can get the year right, probably 2014. It was the year that the Football World Cup was in Brazil.
Okay.
And the event took place in the summer, July probably. So in the spring, I remember sitting in my office thinking, Helen, you've been in love with football since you were a kid. And part of the reason for that was the Brazil team of 1970. So this, I don't know if you're a football fan at all, but this is
but carry on.
This is the team that had Pelé, who you will have heard of,
yeah.
and lots of other famous Brazil footballers. They were probably the best international football team that there's ever been. So sitting in my office, I thought, the World Cup is in Brazil, and it will never be there again in your lifetime, so you should go. And the little voice, the money voice, said, oh, but that's going to be really expensive. and it was then that I coined the phrase to pay more disrespect to money, which I've chosen to do ever since. And there's a little bit of a follow-on. So my son, who was then 17, said, Dad, can I come with you? And I said, well, I can't afford to take you as well as I can barely afford to take me, so let alone take you. And he said, well, I've got a part-time job. He worked at a supermarket on Thursday nights and on Saturdays. And he said, so I can save up. So I said to him, okay, well, you think about how much you can contribute and we'll have a look and see if it's possible. So I didn't hear from him on that topic for, it was nearly a couple of weeks. He must have been thinking about it really hard. And then he said, Dad, I've worked out I can save £1,000. Now, that wasn't enough to cover the cost, but it was harder for him to commit that much than it was for me to finance myself. So we went and had the most wonderful time. And whenever we meet up, invariably that trip will come up. So, what was that worth? That's the thing I've got about money, is that it's kind of such a false measure of it, a lot of things. So what's your take on that?
We're coming up to Christmas, and conversations with people that I know are around Christmas presents and how much do you spend and how much you spend on the children and stuff and what do you want. And for me, it's experiences over things every single time. And I think one of the conversations that I used to have with my ex-husband, we would walk on the beach here in Wales and we'd say, are we spending our money in a way that reflects our values? And I think that's for us, that was such a powerful question, because it's so easy to get tied up into ways of spending money that might reflect what your peers value and spend their money on, or things that you then look back and think, well, I'm not sure that was a good use of money. In one of the books that I've mentioned, it encourages you to look at what your hourly rate is. So if you're paid to work 30 hours a week, for example, but you regularly work 40, it would be looking at 40 hours a week against the amount that you pay rather than 35. So what is your actual hourly rate? And then looking at what you spend and saying, to buy this was 5 hours of work for me. And does that feel like the kind of exchange that feels worthwhile? And I know these sounds really wacky, but I'm using that to look at my spending at the moment. And I used to have the most fabulous garden before I moved to Wales, and I've got a terrace that's really windy and inhospitable to plants. But the joy that I've had recently of buying a tiny greenhouse and starting to plant in it is just amazing. So what I would get, the joy of spending £20 on a hydrangea at a garden centre versus, I went to a Michelin-starred restaurant recently with a friend with the most phenomenal bill. And it made me really clear that although I was buying a thing, that the experience of gardening versus 6 hours, well, it wasn't, about 3 hours having a Michelin-starred tasting menu, weighing those two up in terms of pleasure and enjoyment and value is a really interesting exercise for me.
Yeah, and the reason I'm kind of laughing / smiling is that we just had this conversation about holiday next year. And my question was, so how many days do we have to work to have those 10 days in a villa with a pool in a nice place? And yes, of course it's worth it.
Completely.
And the other thing is the relativity. You talked about your hydrangeas versus the Michelin star restaurant. And I've had this idea for quite some time, actually, and never done anything with it. But it's kind of a book of what you can spend £100 on.
Yes.
So imagine a list of things that are £100. And it's really quite weird, because it might be that tasting menu is one thing. And then, I don't know, 8 people going to the cinema or whatever it is. And it's really kind of incongruous when you think about the difference between some of the things that cost the same amount of money.
Yes, so I'm a big cinema fan and have a sort of a membership card from my local cinema, and I feel a bit bereft if I've not been to the cinema at least once a week, and I make myself go to a range of things that I wouldn't ordinarily see, and that's fantastic. And I know this sounds like a contradiction to what I've just said about buying stuff, but I had the great joy of a huge box from IKEA arriving last week, and it was really big, and it had £100 worth of candles in it. And Alan, I know that sounds like a ridiculous expense, and I have a cupboard in my kitchen, the kind of cupboard that people usually have food in. And
You've got a candle cupboard.
Packed with candles, yes, because one of my greatest joys is creating an environment for myself. I live by myself where there's candles and light and the ambience, and how beautiful that feels to me, and have candles in the sort of terrace as well. So I think, although I've said that spending money on experience is my primary thing, I think living in an environment that feels peaceful and restful, and a place where I can thrive and invite people to, that matters. But I've also got bits of paint flaking off the wall if you look really closely. So it's not about having a pristine house, but it's having a house with plants and flowers and candles and music, and that really matters to me.
Well, you spoke about those things as though they were different, but I think your candles are creating the experience for you, which it wouldn't be without them. So, and actually, let me draw this back. This might sound a bit forced. It's not supposed to be, but does that atmosphere that you create give you a sense of security?
It gives me a sense of home and place, and I think both of those are really strongly connected to security. But the most obvious thing to do with security for me is feeling safe in relationships. And I got divorced 4 years ago after 30 years of a really happy marriage, until it wasn't. And we bravely decided to get divorced, and I moved here to Wales. And I'm really quite an introvert. So the idea of moving somewhere where I don't know anybody, and I actually moved during lockdown as well, was really scary. And the first people who visited me were the police, because I'd been spotted coming over the bridge, and they thought I was a tourist and not somebody who lived here. I moved into our old holiday home. So that was a real lesson for me in is my security in a house, or is it in money, or is it in work that I like? And what does it take to move it back into relationships, having felt very secure in my sort of marriage and my family relationships, and that not being there anymore. So for me, I think my biggest security is investment in the community here and my friends. And I was driving, my mum lived in Knutsford at the time, and I'd been to visit my mum, and I was driving back. And I had a blowout in my tyre, and I was about 20 minutes away from where I live in Wales. And I think I'd only lived here for 6 months. And I managed to pull into a garage that was closed. And I thought, oh gosh, this is pretty much near my worst nightmare. So I didn't have AA cover. I do now, you'll be pleased here. So I didn't have AA cover. I was traveling alone. I didn't have a husband or partner that I could call on. I didn't have a significant relationship at all. But I knew 4 people in the village. And I'm also really rubbish at asking for help. I'm so invested in looking and being competent that the idea of asking for help is a bit alien to me. But to know that I had 4 people that I could phone in an emergency and say, I'm stuck, please can you help me? Helped me realize that I had created enough relationships, or invested in enough relationships, that I could rely on people coming to help me when I needed it. And so that was such a reflection for me on the value of relationships for security, and how pleased I was that I, despite being really introverted and not being around here for very long, that there were people I could call on. So I think knowing that you've got people you can call on in an emergency would be one of what security looks like.
Yeah, and listening to you, I'm thinking about the different levels of security, because we've talked about, at the beginning, you talked about the security of the property and, being kind of in danger, not being safe, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Now we're not really talking about that level of security. Here we're talking about, is it emotional security? Is it that feeling that you can rely on people, that kind of thing?
Yes, I think it's being connected, and part of being connected is knowing that you can rely on people. And I think moving from that being around one person, a traditional relationship, a husband, to a group of people in a community was a really big shift for me. And it was, so I used to be involved in something called circles of support, which is where a group of people would come around somebody who had an issue or a problem, and we'd figure out how to support each other. And I think that kind of circle of support is being created organically in the community that I'm part of. And it's not that we take it in turns, really, to be somebody that needs a bit of support, and accepting that all of us will need support at different times. And it might be support over positive things. So, I've got a new business venture going on, and I've got a group of women around me who are supporting me and giving me advice. And then I have a friend whose son had some difficulties, and a group of us were coming around to see how we could provide support. And then another friend's father's just died, and how we support each other around that. So I think that kind of community support, where people are looking out for each other, both in good times and bad, both celebrating and supporting each other to move towards dreams or aspirations, as well as being there when things are difficult and life is inevitably difficult. So I think that's a completely different set of security. And it, for me, is the biggest insurance policy you could ever want to have, which is people who love you, who are around you, and who you can call on.
Yeah. And then another level of security is something to do with self-security. So there's this sense of being secure in yourself, and the sense that if you're going to be having a wobble, you can get back, and you can be what's the word? It's a bit like the ballast under a boat, something that keeps you steady. And when you've got that sense of security in yourself, that seems to be so this is a third level of security that we're talking now. So I wonder if there are others. I also thought about when you were talking about having that trust in relationships. I was thinking about religion. I'm not a religious person, but actually faith provides a level of security as well, I think. So this word security is a whole lot more complex than when I first asked that question.
Completely, because I think there's sort of layers of self, others, stuff, but faith is a deeper level too. So for me, some of this is about self-care practice. How do I stay safe and secure in my understanding of myself and my mental health, I guess, really. And I have some practices. So I'm a meditator, and I know that I feel more secure in myself and happy when I'm meditating twice a day. And if I've not meditated for a week, I feel it, kind of thing. So there's some practices like that. And I journal. I do something called morning pages every morning. And that's really getting what's in my head onto paper to either let it go or to think it through. So I think I have some self-care practices, or there's lots of other words you could use to describe them, that make me feel more connected and secure. But the faith is, so I used to be an evangelical Christian, and I'm not anymore. My sisters are and were, and I saw the difference that made in their life, and that was amazing, but not for me. But it's, do you believe there's something there? Do you believe that the universe is rigged in your favor, as Rumi would say? So the area of beliefs, I think, is for lots of people connected to security. Because if you, so I was talking to you earlier, I spent Saturday in A&E, and I remember sitting there thinking, what if I really believed that this isn't happening to me, it's happening for me? What would be the silver lining that I would be taking this? What is the learning here that I'd want to process? And that's very different to thinking everything is random and based on fate, and you can't control any of it, versus things happen in order for you to learn from them and grow as a person. So this is very deep, Alan, but I think that's connected to security as well.
Yeah. And so you've reminded me, we're talking about faith and religion. Some Jehovah's Witnesses came the other day, and we just had a quick conversation, and one of the ladies said, "Do you believe in God?" And I said, no, but I really respect some of the good things that comes from people believing in God.
Mm.
And she said, well, how do you think life was born or the world started or something like that? And I said, I've no idea. And I'm quite comfortable with not knowing. And she said, oh, there's nothing more I can say then. And it just, I think the reason I mention this, and I've been thinking about this quite a lot recently, and it links back wholly to security. I'm beginning to believe that goals and objectives are not really so that we perform very well. It's to give us a open brackets false close brackets sense of security. Because when we have goals and targets, it's the known. And we can work towards it. And if we're 10% short, we can do a plan to close the 10% gap.
Yeah.
But what that actually does is focuses on what we know at the expense of the unknown. And if you think about the proportion of the known compared to the unknown, well, let me ask you the question: what out of 100%, what do you think is known and what do you think is unknown?
What is it, globally? Is it?
Well, just like big picture.
Oh.
Everything that is unknown, what percentage added to the known adds 100, makes 100?
I think it will be probably something radically like only 20% is known and 80% is unknown. I think it's probably much higher on the unknown than I would have anticipated.
Right, and I don't know what the answer is. I do know that when I've asked this question, in fact, you're the highest rater of the known. So yeah. So anyway, getting back to the point, why would we live our lives focused on 20%? It doesn't really make sense to ignore 80% of what is.
But it's back to the security question, isn't it? Because what's known helps us feel more secure. So I used to have a much greater sense of my own, of being able to control and plan and set and achieve goals, etc. And then, and if I'm really honest, I think having a 5-year plan and a 3-year plan, the world is too volatile for that. It changes too quickly. Who could have predicted COVID, for example?
Yep.
So now I can only see as far as 6 months ahead. And my goals, if you want to call it that, or my attention to what I'm doing will only be 3 months ahead. And that's the sort of window that I feel comfortable planning in. And I might have sort of dreams and aspirations for 10 years ahead, but they probably won't be things or events. They'll be much more about how I want to grow and be as a person, I think. So I moved considerably from thinking that I can have a 5-year plan and a 3-year plan, both me personally and as a business, and that's worth working towards. And for me, it's a bit more like, what would living my values and our values look like in 6 months' time that we could work towards? And is there a milestone that makes sense there? And I think one of the things that has become important to us as a team has been the joy of spending time together as people. Has become much more important over the past 3 years, not just because of COVID, but it was influenced by that. So I know now, for me, it's not just the work that I do, but the who I do it with and how I enjoy my time with them feels as important to any difference that we can make through the work that we're doing.
And you used the word a couple of minutes ago, intention, and that, I think that's a much healthier word than goal or objective, because it gives you the space to move around within the intention to do what needs to be done, whereas goals and objectives feel restrictive, actually.
Yes.
And on the, now this is just we said earlier that people say, oh, this has just crossed my mind and I haven't thought about this for a while. In 2017, I ran a leadership summit for a European facilities management group. And what we wanted to do for the client was something different that the attendees could really get involved in. And so we said to the client, what we want to do is put in place a piece of extracurricular activity, so outside of the formal program. And we're going to give the guys a brief in small groups of 5 to leave a positive impact in Frankfurt. That was
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
And said to the client, we'd like you to come up with 50 euros per group as the budget. So the client, Bruce, said, well, what am I going to get for my 50 euros times however many groups there are? And we said, well, we don't know, Bruce. but you need to trust in this, and let's see what happens. So in the end, because he's a progressive thinker, he was like, yeah, okay. Now, bear in mind that the program was quite intense, so they didn't have very much time. It was time early in the morning, and then in the evening before the formal arrangement, so very little time. Yeah. And then in the program, the very final session was the presentation from each of these groups about what they did. And I wish you could have been there. I'm not going to be able to describe this well enough. But for instance, one group, they bought a load of flowers and gave them out to commuters as they got off the train at the railway station. Another bought some herbs for a local kindergarten. So they gave them a herb garden. Others bought food from the supermarket and gave it out to the homeless. And in the presentations, everybody was just so emotionally charged about what they had done. Compared to the rest of the program, it was incredible. It's one of the best exercises that I've ever run with a group. Now, I'm not, what's the connection here? What did that come from?
Intention.
Intention, that's right. And so I think this, what would you rather feel? Would you rather have the security of being given a thing to do and executing it really well, or the joy of that thing that you didn't know was going to come about, that you were part of with other people?
Yes. I have to balance my need for control that relates to my need for security with being spontaneous and organic. And my friends, so Kirsty and Aaron, two of my closest friends here, laugh at me because I am exercising my spontaneity and creative and organic muscles, because they're not part of who I am really. So as you say that, part of me is going, yeah, security, of course. But I know that the biggest joys come from co-creating and not knowing, what's possible. And I think the conversation we had earlier about money, how much joy can you bring yourself and others with £100, I think is a really interesting question. But also, if you're giving £100 away, what would be the biggest impact you could have? And I love those examples. How do you spark joy with a small amount of money? Just sounds wonderful. So yes, I am managing my need to want to control things, knowing that it doesn't bring security. And but I know that there's some of me that needs a bit of that kind of predictability.
Yeah, and well, here's a what is it? It's a suggestion, actually. So, and it's the same as any other muscle, I guess. The more you practice it, the more comfortable it becomes, and the more secure you'll feel with it, probably. And I think I'm really learning to trust in my intuition just over, say, the last 5 years. And I used to need the security of a rational explanation for what I was going to do, whereas now I tend more to just do it and see what happens. So we were talking earlier about the virtual exhibition. So when I knew that was going to become a thing, I went on LinkedIn and I was looking for 2 different types of people: 1, artists, and 2, virtual reality people. So I found an artist, a teacher, and I found a virtual reality guy who creates 3-dimensional spaces virtually. And the virtual reality guy said, I really love this idea and I want to be involved, but I can't do it at no income. So I said, well, how much would it cost to build this first example? And he said, well, I could probably do it at cost around about £2,000. So I was okay. Then the teacher said, oh, this is brilliant. I want to democratize art for kids, and for them to be in an exhibition would be wonderful. And I've just received a small grant, and I'm wondering if that could help at all.
No.
So, so I said, really? How much is that then? £2,000.
Oh my goodness, it's amazing.
So I put
Amazing.
the two of them together, and on Monday it goes live. So, now I don't believe that, the universe is smiling and all of that sort of stuff. But how come that happened?
The idea of synchronicities, it's really interesting, isn't it? And I mentioned that I do morning pages every morning. At the end of the morning pages, I ask myself a question. I say, what would courage look like today? And I think the values or the attributes that I want to get stronger on, back to your idea about this being a muscle, I'm finding by asking myself that every day really helps me focus. But I think, therefore, I spot, it's the brain's reticular system. I'm not pronouncing that right, but there's something about, if you're thinking about blue cars, you see more blue cars. It's that kind of thing. So if I'm wanting to be more courageous, I think it's more likely that I'll spot opportunities to do that. But that's such a brilliant example about things coming together with synchronicity in a way that you wouldn't expect.
And you talking there about practicing courage. Do you know the author Jim Lawless? And so one of his books, I don't know if he's written more. So Taming Tigers, and he talks about how he's always advocated trying things that you've never tried, but being the very best at it. And he tells a story about how he was challenged at a talk that he was given, and he agreed that he would learn to ride a horse. So he'd never ridden a horse before. And he said when he got home, he said to the family, I've accepted this bet and I'm going to have to do it now. So how can I learn how to ride a horse? And so the family was saying, oh, well, there's some stables down the road and, that sort of thing. And then he thought to himself, well, when I'm telling people what they should do, I always recommend that they should reach for the stars. They should go for the very best. So anyway, long story short, he eventually found somebody to train him and eventually rode in a professional jockey race. So the reason I mention this is when you ask yourself that question about what does courage look like, I'm curious about what your benchmark is. Is it the timid mouse, or is it Richard the Lionheart? Where on that scale is courage?
Well, so today I'm having a meal with my friend Michelle this evening. And for me, courage is vulnerability. So I mentioned before, I'm pretty invested in, looking competent and together, etc. And therefore, sharing failures or uncertainties or things that I'm not proud of is not really how I like to show up. So for me, courage today is having the courage to be very vulnerable with a friend of mine, and to talk more deeply than we don't chit chat, but to really make sure that it's in the realms of the conversations that really matter to people. So that's very different to the courage in riding a horse. But next week I'm doing something that scares me. I've been invited to Croatia to talk for 7 minutes at the beginning of a European social care awards ceremony, and I'm good at showing how-to things, but the idea of being inspiring and for 7 minutes, it's very scary for me. so in terms of courage, doing that well will feel brave, and also stopping myself worrying about it from now till next Thursday is brave as well.
So have you started, do you have like an idea of your core concept yet, or have you just not started?
I do, but what I realised is that I'd spent a week procrastinating about it and letting myself feel anxious about it and leaving it to the week before. And I've known about this for 6 weeks. And those are behaviours that I'd really like to stop. I'd really like not to let myself worrying about something when actually I can avoid that by taking the time to plan. So I think courage for me is also about facing the areas of my life that I want to grow and develop in, and being bold enough to say it. So in my team, we know what each other's growing edges, for example, and we also know as a team that what we've shied away from, because we're very nice and our relationships really matter to each other, is giving each other feedback or asking for feedback.
Yeah.
So on the courage theme, and I know our card's security, but we've diverted to courage for just a little bit. We've picked up some questions from a colleague of ours called Mark Ecclestone, which are questions like, what could I do or not? What could I do or do differently that would make your life easier? And what is it about our communication together that I could improve? So these kinds of questions, and asking them of each other, is a space that we're moving into. So I think security in relationships is for me that kind of depth of relationship that goes beyond shallow chit chat, and as well as knowing that there are people who will pick you up from the side of the road in the middle of the night when you ask them, knowing that there are people who are prepared to hear warts and all, and you can really be vulnerable with, and you can intentionally keep growing and you developing your relationship. I think that's pretty close to security for me too. And
that last bit that we've just been, like you said, digressing a little bit around courage has reminded me of Susan David's work. So she talks about how courage, are you familiar with her?
What's the title of her book?
So Emotional Agility.
Yes, I have that book. Yes, it's really
okay.
good. Yeah.
So she talks about how courage is not an absence of fear, but instead walking with fear. And I think when you think of it like that, it really gives you a good sense of security, because it stops you being so scared. And this is a bit random as well. So in terms of security and practice, I heard a story about a guy who decided that what he was going to do was, on the underground in London, he would stand up in the middle of the carriage and announce the next station. And he describes how he was really scared the first time, because he was, what are people going to think and what's going to happen? And he did it. And then he did it all the way on his journey. And he said by something like the 10th stop, there's a whole conversation going on. People have joined in the announcement, and it's created this whole brilliant vibe. So I think that is the security that practice can provide you with, compared to your outlook when you've not dared to do something in the first place.
I like that. I did the program by the uncertainty experts a couple of months ago, and that helped change how I think about uncertainty as opposed to something to be scared of, that you want to batten down the hatchets and turn it all insecurity, uncertainty into certainty. So I think the question for me is, what balance between security and uncertainty can I work with? And uncertainty creates opportunities, and to step into that void, or step into here's doing something scary like announcing platforms on a tube, and what could come of that without being able to predict and plan. So it is and I used to be somebody who was all about predicting and planning, but to step back from that, to say, actually, some uncertainty is really, really good for me. And what's the balance between security and uncertainty here? And do I need to do more things to build security? Or actually, can I sit with this not knowing? And sitting with not knowing is more of a challenge for me. I think I'm probably more able to do that if I have the security of knowing that I matter to some people and some people matter to me. I think for me, that's the foundation of being able to thrive and move forward in uncertainty.
Yeah, and I think what's coming through here for me is how security is actually the foundation of freedom, because I recognize that security, and we've talked about emotional, financial, physical, it's a very privileged position to be in compared to some people.
Mm-hmm.
And I was on a call some months ago where the topic was around how the governments in the world can create prosperity. And I was like, why are we talking about prosperity when so many people haven't got the basics?
Mm.
So it would be far better, I think, for governments to put their energy into establishing security for the world, for citizens all over the world, and then allow people to go from there, because of what you've just described, that it gives you just so much compared to when you haven't got that security. Goodness me, I wasn't expecting us to go this deep. Now, and just now you started to talk about how you were asking yourselves the question, what are you encouraged to do differently? And that's actually how we're going to bring this Values Jam to a close. So what is it that you are encouraged to do differently about security as a result of this conversation?
It's powerfully reminded me that security isn't about stuff or whether your front door is locked or not. For me, it's embedded in relationships, and how that's where I want to continue making an investment. And developing deeper relationships is showing up with vulnerability. And that's courage and security for me together.
Okay. And if I was to push you to say, when will you be able to make the first baby step towards that intention that you've just described? When will that opportunity arise?
That will be me raising a glass of wine with Michelle tonight, not talking about the weather, not talking about the mundane stuff, but talking about the real, difficult, vulnerable stuff in our lives. So it'll be that. So over red wine tonight, Alan.
Okay. And mine, I'm not sure if there's going to be something a bit deeper and more philosophical, but one thing that comes to mind is you talking about your books about money. That's obviously something that's of interest to you at the moment. The guy that used to be my accountant wrote a book about retirement planning. So he's called Alan Smith. I don't know, that wouldn't be one of the books on your desk. So I'm going to look that up, and I'll send you the link in case that might be of interest for you to add to your collection. And the other thing, I just want to thank you, because when I pulled the card security, my initial reaction was, this will be interesting, but it wasn't particularly warm and welcoming to that card. But I've loved this conversation. So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a joy. What a wonderful way to spend some time on a Thursday. Thank you so much, Alan.
Cheers.